Very excited to have you today, and we're going to start in just a couple minutes. I realize there's a lot of people still going through the line, but if we probably are running a little late, so we need to move quickly and get started. And while I have your attention, I just want to announce I'm Diane Welsh. I'm your new division chair for the TIM division, and I'm very, very pleased at our turnout and having you in our division. Thank you so much for coming today. Our business meeting is tomorrow at Convention Center 103A, and that is at 5:30 to 6:30, and that will be followed by the best reception of all the divisions, and that is the TIM Social in Convention Center Room 109B. And usually the plan is we have tickets in the business meeting, so you definitely want to show up for both. And we're very, very excited about having you here, and we're just thrilled and honored to have Kathy Eisenhardt as our distinguished scholar this year. So we're going to start in about 2 minutes, so please be courteous when our program starts if you're still going through the line. Thank you very much.
Started. My name is Kathleen. I'm the outgoing chair of the Technology and Innovation Management Division. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2014 TIM Distinguished Scholar Lecture. I hope you're enjoying lunch, and thanks for coming. The award recipient this year is Kathy Eisenhardt from Stanford. I know you all came here to hear from Kathy, so I will keep my introduction really brief. Kathy is the Stanford Eisenman Professor at Stanford University and the co-director of the Stanford Technology Ventures Program. Her work centers on strategic decision-making and innovation, especially in technology-based companies and in rapidly changing industries. This tag cloud on my right, on your left, behind me illustrates some concepts that describe Kathy. It's pulled from her own bio. During her career, as you can see from this cloud, Kathy has studied a wide variety of firms and industries, from software to semiconductors to solar power and on. And she was one of the pioneers, of course, in building theories from case study research. Kathy is also a fellow of the Academy of Management and a fellow of the Strategic Management Society. And last but not least, she was recently noted as the most cited research author in the domain of strategy and organization studies in the past 25 years. So to prepare for this introduction, I borrowed from Kathy's own playbook of grounded theory research, and I talked to 8 friends, colleagues, and former PhD students of Kathy's. So thanks to all of you 8, some of you are here, for taking the time. And after the talk, you have to ask Kathy why 6 to 8 is a significant and the magic optimal number of cases to study. So let me share some of the stories the 8 case subjects shared with me. First one was Bob Sutton. Bob Sutton, a colleague from Stanford, wrote that he first met Kathy when both his own and Kathy's careers were picking up at Stanford at the time when the qualitative movement was rising. Bob writes that both he and Kathy came from the positivist hypothesis testing backgrounds, and Bob said they were like a brother and a sister at that time, and still are. And they both shared the idea and the perspective that it is the role of qualitative research to develop ideas, and ideas that are not proven by qualitative research but then testable in other contexts. And from this background, Kathy developed her now world-famous method of comparative case studies of technology-based firms that uniquely had performance as the dependent variable. Tom Byers from the Stanford Technology Ventures Program and a friend wrote to me that Kathy is a wonderful colleague that has helped build out the Technology Ventures Program and is one of the most focused persons out there that he knows, immensely productive scholar who has accomplished research worth of at least 8 or 9 careers. She's also one of those rare academics who are both at the top of their research game and also terrific teachers. And all this at the same time while raising 2 very beautiful kids. As a personal side note, Kathy is a total role model for everybody trying to find a successful work-life balance. She really knows when to speed up and when to slow down, and as working parents know how to successfully balance at the edge of chaos. Another unique aspect of Kathy's career is that Kathy has, over the years, built great intellectual relationships with her PhD students that extend beyond graduation. She travels all over the world to attend weddings of her former students or stops by just to say hello. Charlie Galunik, Jason Davis, Nathan Furr, and Emily Cox, all former PhD students of Kathy's, had wonderful stories about her. One of them wrote, "Working with Kathy raises your aspirations and makes you want to do work that is both rigorous and relevant. She really has an uncanny knack for knowing how much you can handle and what you need at every stage. One thing you should know about Kathy is her technique that we call tough love. When she gives the PhD students feedback, this PhD student writes, "I'm grateful for every great start that Kathy ever wrote on my papers on the front page, because I really needed it to balance out the rest of the comments. I guess," he wrote, "I would call that technique tough love." PhD students also wanted to tell you that Kathy always has an open door and a really open mind. She's a big believer in emergent research strategies. And even when she has a "don't disturb, don't knock" sign on her door, everybody knows it applies to faculty like me, but never to PhD students. Before I turn it over to Kathy, I wanted to conclude with something that Charlie Galunik, one of her important early students, wrote. "One thing that I really appreciate about Kathy," said Charlie, "is that she made it easy to transition from being her doctoral student to being a colleague and a friend. And she remains a good friend today, whom I have come to appreciate and respect more and more as the years have passed by. Warmest congratulations, Kathy." So please join me and Diane Wells, the incoming chair of the TIM division, in welcoming and congratulating the 2014 TIM Distinguished Scholar winner, Kathy Eisenhardt.
Should be ready to go.
Well, first of all, I want to start out and thank Rita for a great introduction. It actually is true that I write great start and then a million bad comments, but it sounds like I'm getting too predictable, so I'll have to change that. But I want to thank the TIM committee for selecting me, for all of you taking the time to come. I hope it's not just the free lunch. And I want to also thank all my co-authors over the year, many of whom are my PhD students, because I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't have, if I hadn't worked with all of them, all smart, exciting, fun, interesting people who really made the research what it is. So I want to thank all of them as well. What I'm going to do today is talk, not too long, but one talk about 3 time periods. So that's where we're going today. And what I'm going to start out with first is talk a little bit about a couple of papers that I think have been among the most influential that I've done. Not influential to me, maybe not to you, but influential to me is why I chose them. Among others that I could also mention, but these 3 in particular. I'm just going to talk a little bit about where they came from and what I think was important about them, at least again to me, and see what you think. The first one is a paper that I did with Behnam Tabrizi, Accelerating Adaptive Processes, Product Innovation in the Global Computer Industry. And the research question that we were asking is, how do firms develop products quickly? And it was at a time when people in industry were talking a lot about speed, but there wasn't a lot in the academic literature about speed. It was more about, is it an effective product or whatever, but it really wasn't about speed. And so what we thought was really the opportunity here was to write about how to do a fast product. And what we were looking at, or the sample, was 72 product development projects. Half of them were what were termed moderate innovations, and half of them were more major innovations, with 36 companies in the computer industry. And the dependent variable was development speed. It was a regression analysis, obviously not a huge sample, but a sample where we thought we could trade off the size of the sample with the quality of the measures. And the key insight of this paper, and what I always found interesting about it was about it was about how to be fast and making the point that there are multiple ways to be fast. And that there are certainly ways to be fast that are just bad, you know, like throwing a dart or whatever, or rolling dice to make decisions. But there are actually a couple of different ways to be quick. And they depended on the industry. And if you were talking about a relatively stable market, like mini computers it was at that time, then the way to go fast was to take a rational process and squeeze it by doing things like shorter steps, like using CAD, or overlapping steps, like involving suppliers sooner. So it was what we called a compression strategy. You take the process and you shift it. Alternatively, if you were in a more unstable market, the way to go fast was what we called an experiential strategy. And that was around improvisation, rapid prototyping, testing, and interestingly, a powerful project leader. And so it was a completely different way. And the way we used to think about it was, it's like a horse. A horse has one gait, and then they can switch to a different gait. And so it was a completely different way of being fast. It wasn't on a continuum. It was a qualitatively different way of being fast. And I always thought that was an interesting insight. So just to sum up, what I thought this paper did was really bring out the central role of speed in most technology-based industries. It's either the speed of your competitors, the speed of the technology, well, typically both of those, but how relevant that is in both research and it is in real life. The second critical point was the multiple ways to be fast. And the third point was, this was a paper, I reread it the other day. I hadn't read it in a long time. And it's framed around adaptation. And it's making the point that adaptation is really, occasionally you see punctuated equilibrium, but it really mostly is incremental. And that adaptation is often happening through product innovation. And so adaptation from an organization theory point of view is about, in many situations, introducing new products. This was also, for me, a paper that foreshadowed the dynamic capabilities, because to me, dynamic capabilities are processes like product innovation. And so this was a study that was foreshadowing this. It was also interesting, it was a paper, you may not know this, it won the ASQ Best Paper Award for 1995, which I have to say, when the envelope came in the mail and said, you won, I'm thinking, they got to be kidding. I mean, it was a good paper, but I didn't think it was that good. But it turned out to be one of those papers that just got cited a lot. And it was apparently cited so much more than any other paper. And there was even, that was the year of Ranjay Gulati's first paper. So I was surprised that, we beat Ranjay on that, because Ranjay has a great paper, but it was just one of those papers that just got picked up. Anyway, that's that paper. Let me tell you about the second paper that I want to talk about. This is called The Art of Continuous Change, and then there's a colon, and then there's a really ugly rest of the title, which I don't know what possessed us to have that title. But this is a paper with Shona Brown, and the research questions with how to develop successful product portfolios. And the genesis of this paper was that Shona wanted to do a dissertation on product innovation, and all the single product good questions had been done. And so if you wanted to do those questions, you had to go to a big end quant study, and she wanted to do a case study. So we had to find something that hadn't been done where a case study made sense. And nobody had really thought about not just how do you do one product, but how do you actually have a flow of products that's good, 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 good over time. And that was really a critical issue for this paper. So in order for her to be able to do a case study dissertation, we went to this research question because we got into portfolios. This was a unit of analysis of the product development portfolio. We were looking at business units of 6 global computer firms, and actually we actually had more firms than that in the study. But one of the things we sometimes do in case studies is we take out the middle and just show the contrast, the really good and the really bad, because then you can really sharpen up the contrast. So that's what this paper did, so it actually was more to it. It was multiple informants, multiple levels, post-study SBU performance. And the independent variables was the product development portfolio, which was, I think, one of the features of this paper that made it, was how we measured that. And we essentially looked at product development projects underway, and some in the past, and which ones had been stopped and started and stuttered and failed, and which ones were just like a factory, like a machine, like it was rolling out a product, and they were selling well and doing well. So that was what the measure was. And the findings were really 3. One was that if you wanted to have a flow of products, you had to, in your current products, be improvising. So a lot of communication and some fairly clear structure around roles and priorities, and after that, you were just shifting as the situation demanded. The second thing you had to be doing was you had to be probing or exploring or experimenting or doing something into the future. You had to have experimental products or alliances with lighthouse customers or strategic gurus who only thought about the future, but you had to be thinking about the future too. And then the third thing you had to be doing if you wanted one of these flows was to be linking the two. And so there would actually be a choreographed transition from product to product to product. And as you were switching, there was a choreography that was fairly tight about how you switched. And there was a rhythm. And that, maybe the rhythm was the most surprising part. And the rhythm varied. So in some industries it was like every 6 months, in some industries it was every 2 years. But there was a rhythm that let everybody know when to do the switch. So you could choreograph and learn the switch. Which is what, for example, Pixar does in the release of movies, which I don't know if you ever noticed that, but they're on a rhythm. And so what we saw in this paper was this you had to be linked in time. The other thing we saw is that we also saw in this paper what was the wrong things to do. As you can see, little bullets there. Communication and semi-structure was great. Crazy chaos was fun, but you never got a product out. And those structured gates where you had to step through every gate, they didn't work either. On the future, planning didn't work, but just reacting didn't work. And then having no clue about rhythm and transition also didn't work. What did this paper do? It did a lot for me personally in the sense of awakened my thinking. Both Shona and I were tired of a lot of the theories in organization at the time and in strategy. Transaction costs, agency theory, population ecology, give me a break. I mean, they're great theories, but they were like, we were kind of like over those. And so we were looking for something new, and complexity theory and these results really gave it to us. And this idea of an inverted U-shaped relationship between structure and performance was, I think, really sort of a profound insight for me. I don't know if it was for you, but for me. I think the product portfolio as the unit of analysis was fairly cool. The rhythm, the multiple time frames. And the multiple time frames, we had an analogy for that. It was the idea of Tarzan. Tarzan swing, if you want Tarzan to keep swinging through the trees, you've got to be in this current swing, you've got to transition, and you got to go to the next. So you got to be in the current, look ahead, and do it fairly tight transition so you don't fall off. And that was what these products look like. And then finally, a part of this paper that never got picked up, but I thought was really interesting, was that we happened to have some companies that went from bad to good in the study. And it turned out that you had to learn the different parts of the process in an order. So you had to start with getting your present product development portfolio right, then you could do the future with the probing and the experiments, and then you could do the rhythms and the transitions. But you couldn't learn the process out of order, which I thought was an interesting point about building what came to be, I think, a dynamic capability. And the final paper I was going to talk about updates us quite a bit to something that Jason Davis and I did together. And here, I think what we tried to do, and what Jason, particularly Jason, wanted to do, was to update our thinking about product development to how do you actually, which I think is the more contemporary situation. It's not just about what you do in your company, but in many industries you have to do R&D or joint development with others because of the difficulty of some of the technologies and the requirement that, in fact, not everybody has all the best people, and you have to work together on different technologies. And so this paper was pitched towards how do you do an R&D across businesses. And the sample, for those of you who don't know it, it's 8 R&D collaborations among 10 international firms. So it's firms like Cisco, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM. It's big players. And in reading the antecedent literature on the success of collaborations, these were collaborations that should be great. These were experienced players. They were not competitors. They had all the things you would expect to make great collaborations. What was interesting about doing the research was how little the people involved understood what made for a good collaboration. These are not stupid people, right? I mean, the CTO of Intel is not a dumb guy. But they did not have a whole lot of insight into why sometimes their collaborations were great and sometimes they weren't, even when it was the same people in the same companies. And so that was kind of an eye-opener, I think, to me, that you couldn't just, they could go in and say something like, it's the people, or something like that, but then you look at the bad collaboration, it's the same people, so it's not really the people. So what was up? So that I think was what I thought was an interesting part of this paper. You can see it's a grounded case theory building kind of study, so I'll just leave it at that with the usual, multi-method data collection. Let me tell you what the findings were, though. This was because I think this was interesting, is when you're talking about collaborations, the key to a successful collaborating was what was called at a meta level, rotating leadership. And the idea was that if you have two big partners, or even two small partners, but two sort of equal partners, the collaboration works when, let's say Mary's sitting in the front here, Mary Tripsis. Let's say we're working together. Mary takes it for a while, then it comes back, and then I take it for a while, and then it goes back to Mary. But when Mary's in charge, Mary is in charge, and she gets to take my grad students, and she gets to take it down her path. When I'm in charge, we go down my path. And that was the idea, that we switched leadership, that we would switch trajectories, so she might go in one direction, I might take it a slightly different one. She might go more of a Tim direction, I might go more of a strategy direction. And we might switch out who's on the team. So later on, some people would switch in and out, although we would stay the same. And what that did was it get everybody buying in, because you were motivated, because you knew you had your chance. It also let the teams benefit from the creativity of the other company. So they might have some ideas, they see the problem in a new way, and they take it in a new direction. And it's also still an exciting project, so people want to be on it. So you get some mix in who the people are and some change on that. In contrast, what didn't work was a dominant style. If one side dominates and the other just goes along. That's demotivating, uninteresting, you never get quite the fresh perspective. If Mary's dominating our relationship, after a while, I'm like kind of over Mary, and I let her go, and meanwhile I'm working over with somebody else, Francisco, because she's so bossy, as perhaps her children say. I don't know, but that's what happens. The second thing is, so we don't get the freshness, and it becomes an increasingly stable set of players on the team because no one's that interested in the project anymore. What was the surprise, though, was that consensus didn't work. And the problem with consensus was it was too much meat in the middle, half-baked, and took a long time. So we'd talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and we'd sort of a compromise, and it wasn't really that good, and everybody was sick of compromising, and nobody enjoys a meeting anyway, and so consensus didn't work. And so what the real insight of this study was around this idea of this rotating leadership, to trade off who's in charge. And by the way, interesting at the end of the projects for a number of these companies, on the good projects, they would take the patents that were produced and they'd put them like in a bowl, and you just got to pick, like you get to pick one and then I get to pick one. You get to pick one, I get to pick one. So it's kind of an interesting and simple way of actually dividing up the intellectual property. What were the contributions? I think the contributions were not the huge contribution, but recognizing innovation outside the organization. We're obviously not the only ones who've done that. The rotating leadership, that oscillation of leadership, I think was very cool, at least to me it was. And that combination of understanding the leadership, understanding how the search process changed because of that leadership, and how it switched up the people that created freshness was all, I think, an interesting part of this study. And then finally, sort of fabulous dependent variable probably sounds too congratulatory, but it was Jason's. And it really is, I think, an incredibly good dependent variable that combines how many patents did you get, how many products did you get, what was the commercial success, what were people's qualitative insights and feelings about the project at the end. So we really felt like we captured, this was a great project, and this really was a dog, and we knew it on pretty much every dimension. And so it was a really very robust measure of performance in a way that I think only small N research can do. Not necessarily case, but when you get into hundreds and thousands, it's just hard to get as great a measure as we had in this study. So overall, what are, I think, some of the themes of my work, what I think the central themes are in sort of a retrospective sense? I guess I've been a person who's always been about structure and process and thinking about how do you actually manage projects both organizationally and strategically, and then linking into bigger concepts in organization theory like adaptation and change, or in strategy like dynamic capability. I've also tried to think more about time Initially speed with Benham, rhythm with Shona, and oscillation with Jason. And I think we've tried to have, while always performance-oriented, because it's hard to be an engineer and not be performance-oriented, dependent variables that I think are both interesting conceptually and well-measured in a way that, again, as I say, I think small n lets you do. So those, I think are the themes, at least some of the themes of my work that came to mind to me, and hopefully that's of interest to you. I will say one thing parenthetically, I don't know how many of you know this, but the work with Shona on Edge of Chaos and all that, I don't know if you know that Shona went on and became the senior VP of operations business operations at Google for 10 years and implemented a lot of our ideas at Google. And she was known as the chief chaos officer. And when she started as a PhD student, she told me she was going to retire when she was 42. And I sort of laughed because, who retires at 42? But you know what? If you're the senior VP at Google for 10 years, you can, and in style. So it worked for her. Let me now say something a little bit more about contemporary, and I'm going to stay in the same themes, but I'm going to talk a little bit about contemporary. I thought about what do we know? If we all went in and talked to a CEO, or we taught a class, or we just thought about it, what do we know? I think we know a fair amount about routine product innovation within a firm. I think we know a lot about getting ideas, particularly from startups, by acquiring them and integrating them, so from people like Melissa Grabner or Fanish Puranam and other people who are probably in this room. I think we know a bunch about alliances between equals and how they create innovation. I think what we know less about and what the opportunities are around open source, although I think that's been some developed. I think there's still more opportunity. Ecosystem innovation, so people like Rahul Kapoor, who's, we're in his hometown, or current hometown, has done a lot in ecosystem innovation. I think there's more to do there because I think it's complicated when you have multiple actors. 2 actors is easy, 3 or 4 that you're coordinating with is tricky, and trying to figure out your timing and strategy. I don't think we've actually probed much on the alliances between unequals. How do big and small players work together? I think we've done a lot of biotech, pharma, dyadic stuff predicting something, but I don't think we've done a lot of getting inside and seeing how do those relationships really work. And I think crowdsource is another one where I think we're starting. I think that's a wide open. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one in the room who couldn't answer the question, but somebody said to me, well, how do you do crowdsource well? I have no idea. I mean, have a big crowd with smart people, and after that I kind of wouldn't have anything to say. So I think that's a really wide open area for us to go into. Time? Time is still, I still think it's incredibly critical. It just doesn't get picked up much as a research topic. Maybe because it's hard, I don't know. But I do think some of the interesting things around time right now are people around exploiting old technologies. We often get locked into the new, and I think people like Rita and Nathan Furr and some other people, Dan Snow, have gotten into how do we actually get the most out of the old stuff. It's kind of like going into your closet and, how could I make that wearable again? So I think exploiting old technologies is a pretty interesting new thing to do. I think timing and competitive strategy is pretty interesting too. When do we introduce an innovation? How quickly, how slowly, before or behind? And Rita has certainly done some things with her out of sync paper on that topic. But I had that melding of competitive interaction with innovation, I think, is a really exciting area for somebody to get into. And I think one of the challenges is competitive interaction is not easy to study. But I think that's an exciting thing to do. As far as the third stool of my stuff, dependent variables, I'm not going there on patents. I think they're good and they're bad, and I'm not the person to talk about patents, but just to say I think it's something to think about for people of whether or not that's how wrapped up in patents we want to be in our measures of innovation. Finally, looking ahead. As I thought about what I don't think many people are studying, and yet what's a really interesting topic, and an important one, that maybe isn't, at least wasn't on my horizon, perhaps it's on yours, was how do you really do a breakthrough? And not just like a mobile IT app. That's kind of like, those are a dime a dozen. And not even IT. Although I've made a career to some extent of studying IT, I think IT is limited. And I'd rather see some studies on solar, on batteries, on new materials, on genomics, something that tackles climate change. I think there's some exciting, and that's where I think the big breakthroughs that are going to change our lives are going to be. I mean, Facebook has changed my life. I'm not sure it's made it better. But something that conquered climate change, now that matters to me. Or something that makes my health better, or poverty better. Something that's a big issue, not Facebook, not Twitter. Twitter has not made my life better. Somebody's probably tweeting about me right now in a way that I won't like. So you know, but it's these other kinds of areas. And how do you do a fundamental breakthrough in, let's say, material science or in batteries? How do you do that? And is it really the people? I think there's a real question here. Is it having incredibly smart people who are well trained, or can the process help? So what's the balance between, is it really about just having incredible people, or is it about a great process, or is it the combination? But how important are those? The other thing I've been thinking about that I'm not sure you know, I wouldn't put it at the level of curing cancer or climate change, but I'm writing a book these days with Don Sull, who's now at MIT, was at London Business School. And we're writing a book that I was tired of 35-page papers to some extent and academic writing, and I always wanted to do a book that was like a Malcolm Gladwell book. And that's what this book is. It's not a business book. It's a book that's got gardening in it, and golf, and baseball, and the Romans, and all kinds of stuff in it, on some of our stuff on simple rules. And in the course of writing that book, what I was realizing was that some of the most innovative people were using rules, and rules is a little bit beside the point here, but they had constraints. And how did constraints change the way they could be innovative? So Claude Monet painted haystacks ad nauseum, but created some interesting point of view around light and really launched a change in the way art was seen and done. Or the Prius. I don't know if you've read the story of the Prius. The Prius is a story of a product team that was told to achieve impossible goals, and they did. Looking in crazy places, too, this is the Tokyo subway. There's some people who are working on designing places like the Tokyo subway, and they're using slime mold to show them optimal paths. Slime molds are dumb and ugly, but they're very focused on getting food. And so they actually make a trade-off between resiliency and efficiency fairly effectively. So watching how slime molds operate. Or there's some other people looking at termites and robots. So looking at how termites build 40 and 50-foot structures when they're really dumb and don't have a lot of physical skill. And this turns out to be a really important problem in the construction industry, where there is really too little automation. There's very little automation in the construction industry. It's expensive, and there are a lot of injuries. And so these particularly, it's a set of Harvard researchers, are using termites as the impetus to think in a more creative way. What are the constraints that termites have, and how do they do it? And then finally, we've been looking a little bit at DARPA. And DARPA is interesting because they're trying to solve problems that is what are known in the Pasteur's quadrant, which means really hard science on something practically important. So they were behind, for example, the GPS technology. That was just one thing DARPA has done. The internet way back in the past as well. But they're always trying to do, often military, but not always military, kinds of things. Or usually, it is often military, but it's often also related to a civilian application, let's say like GPS. And they have an interesting way they do product development, or not really product development, more breakthrough innovation. And they have fixed time limits on their projects of somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And they bring stars from around the world to work on them for that amount of time. So truly elite scientists working for a very short time on a very hard problem. And they've, you know, it's hard to know how successful they've been because it's been pretty secret, or what their hit rate is. But certainly they've had some outstanding breakthroughs. And it's a really, and one of the things they attribute that to is the constraint. The constraint that we only have so many years to do this, and that's it. Either this is too hard a problem, we can't do it, or this team doesn't know the right way, and it's the wrong team, but we're done. And so I guess what I'm trying to say with this slide is there are the big breakthrough innovations around serious problems like health and climate change. And there are also the micro-processes of how people's minds work that are around what makes me more or less creative if I have a constraint. And there's some exciting things on the very micro side of, the new brain scan technologies and so on, and how people think. So I think there's both the macro problem and there's this very micro way of thinking about how can people be more creative, that I think is also some stuff that maybe is out there beyond, kind of out over the edge. So I guess that's kind of what I wanted to say. I want to say, maybe I'll step back for one sec. I also want to thank, again, Tim for selecting me as their distinguished scholar. I want to thank all of you for coming, and I want to thank my colleagues. A couple of papers and people I didn't mention, but people like Charlie Galenick, who Rita mentioned. I think his work on standalone business units and innovation is great. Jeff Martin, another colleague of mine, former student, on cross-business innovation. Cross-business innovation is really exciting. Emily Cox doing funding of innovation. So there are a bunch of other people that have also, I think, contributed to my thinking, and I appreciate that. So overall, I just want to say thank you all for coming, and I guess our next step is opening for questions. So thank you.
Testing. Questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand. Thank you.
Hi, Kathy. I'm wondering if you can expand a bit on what do you think the simple rules for our research should be in the next, say, 10, 20 years?
The simple rules for your research, you mean getting published or doing something interesting? I conceptualize, I mean, how did I conceptualize it at the time? I didn't touch research in our book, but I probably should. No, I think I've been fortunate in working with really great doctoral students who very often have been the people who come up with their passion. So like many of you probably know Chris Bingham now at University of North Carolina. He was an international relations major and he always wanted to study internationalizing. And we did. It's just that then became strategy and heuristics and that sort of stuff. So I am not a very good person as far as coming up with my own, I work with stuff on the paper already, and work with people who have an idea, and then I kind of can go with it. So that's maybe mine. And then my other is, in the pragmatic sense of getting published, it's all about the reviewers and the 3 people you get. So having an editor that loves you and 3 people, at least 2 out of 3 people who love you too. And after that, and you have a good paper, obviously, but that's kind of the key. That's my simple rule for that. And I don't know how you get that exactly, but I know that's my rule. Anything else on people's minds? Go ahead and shout out, or the microphone is coming.
I work many years in the semiconductor business.
Yeah.
Talk about power and politics and innovation.
Talk about power and politics and innovation. What do I want to say about that? There is power in politics and innovation. There's no doubt about that. And there's no doubt that you have to have, I haven't studied them personally, but I know other people have, the idea of a politically savvy product champion or innovation champion. And that's incredibly important inside an organization, is to have that person who understands and can navigate the politics. In the rotating leadership study, which was big companies and obviously big politics, the key to those collaborations also that I didn't really say was that, in fact, the companies were connected at every level. They were connected at the CTO level, they were connected at the project manager level. They were conducted probably at 4 or 5 levels within each one of those organizations. And that was critical to making the politics happen on each side. So I don't have hugely more to say than that, other than somebody who's running interference on the politics. And then when you're talking about those collaborations, probably within organizations as well, that having multiple levels of people taking care of the politics is essential.
So first of all, I would encourage, why don't we have anyone who has questions maybe come up and we can create a nice line, and then you don't feel so picked on for having to raise your hand in this big intimidating crowd. So I know a number of you are here from the TIM Doctoral Consortium, and so Kathy, I'm going to I think I'm going to try and channel a doctoral student question, although this would still be relevant for me too, which is, as you're most known for qualitative methods, but one of the things I found interesting as I've looked at your work over time is that you've done a lot more than just qualitative work, and you've got some really cool simulation stuff that you've done with doctoral students more recently. So as you advise your own doctoral students, as you think about what methods are appropriate in what context, and can you get a job if you have a qualitative thesis, and so what advice would you have for doctoral students about how they should think about methods, multi-method projects, qualitative versus quantitative, in a broad sense?
Yeah, I think the conservative safe path is the big N killer econometric study. I think that's an easy way to. It's not easy is the wrong term. That is a way that will win. You can up front, you know what the hypotheses are. If you get good data and you know your econometrics, you can have a really good study, a really good dissertation. Case studies are riskier because you don't know until you've done it whether you're going to find something. You might come up and find the same thing that, like Mary found 20 years ago and you found it again, and that's not publishable. So it's riskier. I've never had anybody say, though, that it was boring and not fun. It is more fun to go out and talk to people than it is to go through PTO documents coding patents. I mean, it's just inherently more interesting, exciting. You're talking to real people. It's just more fun. And I think it's typically more path-breaking. I think if you look, for example, at AMJ and the list of, AMJ Paper of the Year awards, there are probably more quant papers, but the case inductive qualitative papers are way overrepresented compared to their numbers. What I tell my students who are thinking about doing cases is it's smart to be multi-method. A good example of that is Jason Davis, who is doing simulation but also did cases. Current student Doug Hanna is doing formal modeling, which is sort of the new gig I'm trying, but he's doing cases. But I think if you're doing qualitative cases, it's probably wise to be multi-method and don't have all your eggs in that basket. It takes a little more time, but I think it's a wiser choice to do that.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I'm going to talk about the last point that you made about the constraints and innovation.
Yeah.
Anything that you wanted to say about management constraints? So I quite like the idea of looking at this in a broad sense and writing, a kind of popular book, which would be great. But if you think about this from a management control, for example, perspective, of how organizations are managed and whether those control systems, being constraints very often, actually encourage or not innovation. Is that something that you've done or something you've been writing about?
I think the management control system, if it's a tight budget and rigorous milestones and all that, I'm not thinking of constraints in that traditional control way. I'm thinking of them more as different. So like Claude Monet saying, I'm going to just do high stacks for a while and see where that takes me. Or the Prius guy saying, I'm going to give you, or actually Apollo was like that. I'm going to give you impossibly hard targets. Now go get it. Actually, the termite was kind of interesting because what the research put on themselves were constraints. Our robot has to be really dumb and not be very physically able. Therefore, within those constraints, how do we design something interesting? So I'm thinking about constraints that way. I don't have a lot of information about what makes a good constraint or a bad constraint. I've just been in the course of writing this being struck by that and say, that's something we haven't probed about how a constraint, not like the traditional, like your boss is on top of you kind of constraint, but a different kind of a constraint, how that might reframe the way people and groups think. So that's where I'm going with it.
Okay, speaking of the case study, our team member do all the case study and we read every paper of you. And we know that the case study is often a phenomenon-oriented study. We noticed that there are a lot of theories can explain the phenomenon, but we cannot find the most proper theory to do our theoretical contribution. But in your every paper, the theory contribution is so obvious and so not incremental. It's very huge. So I'm confused that how can you find the most proper theory to explain the phenomenon and do the theoretical contribution? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think what's happened in this kind of research is the bar has changed over the years. So it used to be like, if some of you may know, probably my first case paper is fast decisions, and all you had to do to set that paper up was say, fast decisions are really cool and nobody's thought about it, and look, all the ways that you'd come off the top of your head wouldn't work. So what's going on? And that's really all you had to do was say, it's cool. And you can't do that anymore. You really do have to set up within the literature now. And so you have to set up and say, for example, a paper that I'm working on with Sam Garg on venture boards. We had to set that up. We tried it in the corporate governance literature. People don't like it in that framing. So we set it up now in the strategic decision-making literature. So I think in the current milieu in which we're operating, we have to start with inside, coming from some theories. So it's actually grounds, in some sense, more naturally. But the old, let's just do a phenomenon that seems cool, won't really work anymore. So we're more tightly tied to theories into what's around. So for example, the paper with Chris Bingham on rational heuristics is grounded, it's grounded with some Kahneman and Tversky, some Gigerenzer, some other stuff on psychological decision making, because you kind of have to do that at this point in the routines literature, because that's the way you have to write now.
I would like to ask you about, you mentioned open source, that could be a topic that we could further contribute. So I would like to ask about perhaps some ideas related to open source that you think would be interesting to explore, and I guess also crowdsourcing, although it's more underdeveloped in the administrative side. So.
Yeah, I think open source, there have been a number of people, that come to mind who've worked on open source, and Sonali Shah, for example, or Mary actually, on community-based open source. I don't know that literature super well, so I'm a little reluctant to say anything because it won't maybe be insightful. There are probably 15 people in this room who could say better things than I could. But I think that's probably a little bit past its peak to me. I think crowdsource is on the up. I think people haven't really nailed crowdsourcing and how that works and how big's the crowd and it looks like there's some, like in an innovation process, there are particular leverage points where crowdsourcing is useful. And I'm not sure that we figured out where those leverage points are. So that would seem to me to be one place. So I think crowdsource has some more opportunities than open source. And there, as I say, probably 15 people. There's probably even like a PDW on open source that would to give you more information than I could. Thanks.
Thank you.
Kathy, you've been very successful, obviously, at Stanford with your technology ventures and your center. And a lot of the medium, smaller universities that have innovation centers haven't been successful in that. And I'm wondering if you could share with us some lessons learned that you think would apply. You talked in your earlier in your slides about small to large. Yep. And really, lessons learned from that in this field that maybe could be applied to other universities from Stanford?
Yeah, I think in our center, I don't know that it's unique because I haven't, gone around to everybody's center and see what they're doing. But I think what has made our centers be very successful, it has been, I mean, apart from the research, we've got some really great stuff going on. I think some of you may use our eCorner videos, for example. Is that we have a leadership team of Tom Byers, who runs the research side. I run the Tom Byers runs the teaching side. I run the research side. Tina Seelig, she's doing something else right now, but for many years ran kind of the administration and outreach. And so we had three, pretty good people running different parts of it, and we really saw all those parts as being equally important. And you probably get teaching, research was actually, a lot of entrepreneurship centers don't put much of an emphasis on research, and we actually do. And we actually, Tom and I think have a healthy tension. When he wants to hire an adjunct, I say, no, we have enough adjuncts. We need more tenure track. So I think we have a tension around not getting it too adjunct heavy. And then the third thing that we do is this outreach stuff. For example, we've sponsored conferences in South America and Asia and Europe on how to do research centers and how to do research and how to run teaching programs in schools in their countries, mostly actually engineering schools. But so we've done, and then we have a big web presence. I think our podcast download is 25,000 a week, 30,000 a week. So we've also got a big web presence of our speaker series and podcasts and videos and so on. So I think what we tried to do is balance those three and not let any one of them take over the center. So that's been the key, I guess I think about it, is not letting any one part of the stool take over.
Thank you. Congratulations, Kathy.
Oh, thank you.
Having known you as a PhD student, I know that other than the PhD students you mentioned, you've mentored many others who were not directly your students, so thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
I also want you to say something to those of us who are now mentoring others. How do we set people up for success? Who mentored you, and what colleagues helped along the path? Because I know you've done path-breaking work, not just in the topics and methods, but in being a role model for those who are following you.
Okay. Let's see. First of all, my own mentors. I actually am somewhat. Probably my biggest mentor is Bob Sutton, actually, even though he said that we were like brother and sister. And I'm actually a little older than he is. But we did graduate about the same time, and he was actually very helpful to me. And the irony of the case study stuff is he taught me case studies. And I wrote the paper, and he was going to write the paper, but I had already written it, and he said, okay, you just take it. Which is just the world of serendipity, because at that point, pretty much all I knew I got from Bob. So I'd say Bob was probably really helpful to me, as well as my department chair, Warren Hausman, who is in operations and probably someone that none of you know unless you're very involved in Informs. He's been the Informs president. As far as mentoring doctoral students, I probably, if I have some doctoral students out there now, they probably feel a little neglected, because I haven't been the greatest mentor the past past probably year and a half, but because I've had a bunch of other things going on. But I've tried to stay in the broader pattern, try and let the students go with where they wanted to go, but I would more direct them, or not constrain them so much, but they want to go here, and I'm saying, well, it'll really work if you go over there. But mostly I've let my students go where they want to go. And that's been, I think, really creative for me. If it had just been for me, I would have just kept doing, the same stuff. And it was the students, it's like rotating leadership. The value of rotating leadership was when you rotate, you go somewhere else. And that's what the students did for me, is I went other places. So I think that was helpful for them, and it was helpful for me. So those are maybe the things I would say about that. Oh, the other thing, and this is just a really concrete thing, is I'm very big on a lit review. Like before you start your dissertation, you do a lit review, and you know backwards and forwards everything about your topic, so that you can really then say that's where the holes are. Because if you don't know the literature up front, you're not going to go in the right path, and then you're not going to be able to publish very well. So I'm in just a very practical thing, I'm very big on doing lit reviews. Even though, darn it, you can't get them published. Anybody else or anything else?
Hi, Kathy.
Hey, Nathan.
Hey. So, looking back on a great career, I'm just curious what you might have done differently, what you might have done less of, and what you might have done more of.
Oh, less and more.
Or maybe it was perfect.
Or maybe I'm not self-reflective. Yeah. It's probably I'm not self-reflective, but I've been pretty happy, actually. Because when I did get bored with things, I did switch it up. I did get bored with 35-page papers, and I did a book. And then I did a bunch of, high-level consulting, and, I've been a couple times to Davos. And when you're in a place and you know every name tag, like they're a famous person, and you're kind of there for the court jester, like you don't really have a role, much beyond that. But that was really cool for a while. But then, it's kind of a hassle going to Switzerland in January. And so, and plus they don't want you anymore, which is the other part of it. So then I went back into research for a long time, and then now I'm switching out and doing this thing with Don that's completely different. I think that's the beauty of our careers, is you can remake yourself. And so I've been pretty happy with remaking myself. And so doing this thing with Don, which is the Simple Rules book. I don't know whether we'll be Malcolm Gladwell. My friends say we're a little dense for Malcolm Gladwell, but we're working on it. But then I'm doing formal modeling with Doug, so it's just fun to do new stuff.
Great.
And I'll self-reflect harder maybe sometime.
Okay, any more questions? I wanted to thank Kathy for a great talk and great Q&A. Thanks all our members for coming to see us today, and hope you will join us tomorrow, as Diane mentioned earlier, for the business meeting and social. So let's give a big round of applause to Kathy.